period with announcements today from the government which affect schools, which I'm sure you'll be aware of and you'll be hearing a little bit more about this evening. As we go through tonight, I'll introduce people to you as we come to that moment on the agenda. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat and saying hello. It's good to see you. Also, I'd like to thank Nikki Evans and Sam Riddle, who are providing the British Sign Language interpretation tonight. And we've got technical support provided by John Morgan and Steve Cooper, who are managing the questions, and Jacqueline Arnold, who's managing the tech support. So in light of the fact that we have had announcements today from Gavin Williams and the government about what's happening next in the COVID pandemic and what schools' response to that should be, I'm going to turn to our Joint General Secretary, Kevin Courtney, to give us an update, and then we'll move on through the rest of the agenda. So Kevin, if you could talk to us about the latest announcement and the press release that the union has put out and what you think our response should be at this point. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm very happy to do that. And I know that Robin Bevan has been through a lot of the detail of the announcement today. So there may be things that he would want to supplement to what I'm going to say now. There's this clear context that there is a growing public disquiet about isolation. Adults who have been double vaccinated, having their children sent home, it's hard to understand for them sometimes why that's happening. And the number of cases that of children being isolated because of the government's incompetence is astonishing. 375,000 children were at home last week because of COVID cases, and it's 640,000 this week. So a really significant increase. And with the doubling rate that Chris Whitty said last night of 9 days, there is still time for that number to be a lot more before the end of term. So we have to understand that that's part of the context in which we're responding to government announcements. Now, I frankly was a little surprised by the announcement today. We had heard it trailed that isolation and bubbles and then isolating close contacts was going to be abandoned, but we'd heard it trailed that that was going to be replaced by daily contact testing of the children who are the close contacts. And that a trial had been running of that 200 schools had been in. But that is not the announcement that's been made. Instead, the announcement is that bubbles and self-isolation are going, as well as the removal of masks from mid-May, but without the replacement by daily contact testing. And there are two sides to this. It means that head teachers do not have to do daily contact testing and test, track and trace anymore. So that's a relief of workload for school leaders. But they say that NHS test, track and trace will do it instead, so that a child who is positive in a secondary school or a parent of a child who is positive in primary school will contact NHS test, track and trace. NHS test, track and trace will then interview the child or the parent to find out who the close contacts of that child are. And then they will talk to those children or those parents, and they will tell them that they have to do a PCR test. The children will not have to isolate until they've had their PCR test, and they will only isolate if they have a positive test on the PCR. So this will relieve a substantial amount of workload for school leaders who won't have to do the daily contact testing and won't have to do the contact tracing that you're currently doing, the best part, the most efficient part of the current test, track and trace system. But I think a lot of school leaders will share the concerns that the union has, that this method of NHS doing this may not be that good at bearing down on cases in school. And so the big question is, where do we then end up? The press release that we've put out is asking questions. It's not saying that the government is definitely wrong, but it is saying that the government is clearly investing now effectively in a system of herd immunity, that they are, that people are talking about cases falling again before September or in the mid-September. I've heard that from a scientist in a DFE briefing today. But unlike previous attempts, in the previous waves, the reason cases fell is because the government put in place restrictions. So they're now talking about cases falling simply because we've run out of people to infect, because some people are protected by vaccination and some 20-year-olds will just get the infection, hopefully not suffer from it. And so there's a sort of herd immunity hope. And I guess we all share the government's hope that this will work, that cases will fall, that hospitalizations and deaths won't rise, that there will not be a new mutant strain of the virus which will defeat the vaccination, and also hoping that when cases spread, that there aren't lots of cases of long COVID amongst children. So we're all hoping for that. And that's what we've said. We've said, the government is hoping for that. But we're also saying in our press release that we think that you can hope for the best, but you have to plan for something that isn't the best. If hospitalizations and deaths start to rise, or if long COVID turns out to be a really significant threat, or if there is a new variant, then we need to be prepared with systems in school that can keep cases down. So we are repeating our calls for investment in ventilation, to have CO2 monitors which don't improve ventilation by themselves, but which reveal whether your room is well ventilated. Investments in the installation of HEPA filters, which cannot be at school expense, but which in New York, the New York City government is putting 2 HEPA filters into every classroom, and the German government is doing similar. And also to invest in Public Health England running some mass testing on school sites on a regular periodic basis. The government is going to ask you as school leaders in secondary schools to set up for testing all children in September, testing all children to see if they are asymptomatic carriers of the virus using the LFT tests. And if you get a positive, to ask that child to stay at home. That will be, we know, a burden setting that up. You set them up for March the 8th, but now you're going to be told to do that with so little notice. But we're calling for the government to invest in ventilation and for public health to run that sort of asymptomatic testing on a regular basis, so that if the government's hopes do not come right, then we do have something that can control cases in school. Because at the moment, it feels like they're saying we will just let cases rise and hope that the vaccination makes sure that we're all safe from it. I'll just say one other thing and then stop and see if Robin wants to add any detail or if there are any questions. The ban on the August the 16th is the deadline by which nobody has to isolate anymore. But the government seems to be saying that from July the 19th, the NHS Test Track Trace will take up the public, the contact tracing. So if my reading of that is right, that should mean that head teachers don't have to contact parents at the start of the summer holiday to tell them that they have to isolate their children. That's my current reading of what I've seen of the government. Robin might be able to say whether I'm right or wrong about that, or whether there's any further update on it.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think, when I listened to the announcement, I was left a bit puzzled as to exactly what is supposed to be happening between the 19th of July and the 16th of August. So, Robin, yes, if I could bring you in with some comments yourself, please.
Thank you, Anne. And I think probably the first thing to say is that everything that Kevin has said, of course, applies in England only. And we've got members on the call tonight from Wales, probably from Northern Ireland. I haven't followed all of the names through in the participants. And of course, they'll be under different regimes, but regimes that may well have some of the same features. I think the first thing I'd say, Anne, is that we are in a position where schools are genuinely struggling, and something had to, I think, change. I think that is kind of an accepted position. So just to give you an example from Southend, there are, I'm going to quote 2 or 3 different secondary schools in my own secondary school. It's a matter of extraordinary good fortune. We currently have, I think, 2 pupils in self-isolation. The school 2 miles away has only got around about 100 pupils out of 1,000 left in school. So you've got extraordinary differences in the degree to which this has impacted schools. And you can't quite tell, in all honesty, whether that is because of a lack of testing in some schools, a lack of reporting the results of those tests. You know, is it actually just not being disclosed? Are people just disregarding it? And how reliable are the tests in the first place? So we do have something of a mess. Good news, I think there is some good news today. It's the first time that Gavin Williamson has stood up in the House of Commons to give an announcement and had the guidance ready to be issued at the same time. And it's also good news that that guidance is very specific and very clear. I went through it this afternoon. I don't think I necessarily like all of it, but I went through it. It is very specific. It is very clear. It does tell us what we need to do. Kevin's given a very good summary of it. Things that would be, I think, of concern to all school and college leaders. To what extent will NHS track and trace be actually able to do the job that they're claiming that they're going to take off school leaders' hands? Or is it the case that they're simply going to contact the school and say who was in the class and effectively ask us to do exactly what we've been doing anyway, the only difference being that they would then do the notifications? Good news as well, I think, that the threshold for isolation is going to be PCRs. And it's going to be PCRs with immediate access to them. So if you are a close contact, you can go straight for your PCR. At the moment, of course, we've got this slight mess where people who are on isolation don't have access to that unless they start showing symptoms. So that's a positive step. However, I'm really with Kevin here, which is that unless this is very, very closely monitored, it will be really, really difficult to see in the autumn the extent to which it is actually managing to detect, monitor and respond to levels of infection in the school population. Final comment, Anne, if I may, is that there is a big gap. And the really big gap for me looking at the guidance is over the arrangements for those colleagues who are more at risk, whether that's by virtue of underlying medical conditions, whether it's because they are caring for someone who is at risk, or in relation to the later stages of pregnancy, and also the arrangements that need to be there for those pupils who are at greater risk. And it does appear as though with the removal of all the other mitigations, that has not been properly addressed. And that should be, as trade unionists, a principal cause of concern, but we should be specifically looking out for those. The guidance is pretty clear, and Kevin's right. Final thing on the testing, this is secondary schools and colleges only. The secondary schools and colleges required to have 2 LFTs before the pupils return to school in the autumn term. The arrangements do allow you to start that during the holidays, which some schools probably will choose to do simply because it will allow for a smoother start to the autumn term. We all know the pressures of a new term. When we arranged the testing back in March, we did it from a position where we were slowly phasing pupils back in. We knew that we were moving them from remote learning in established classes back into the classroom. On this occasion, we got all the challenges of the start of term combined with the testing. And Kevin's quite right, we should be putting all the pressure we can to ensure that as much of that testing is supported by public health as possible. That's what they're good at, that's their expertise. And it's always been a bit mad that it's been down to an exaggeration here, amateur education staff to do it. I'll stop there, Anne.
Well, thank you very much, Robin, and I should have formally introduced you before you started your answer, but I'm sure everybody knows that you are our esteemed president, coming to the end of your period of office, and what a period it's been. But For those of you that don't know, Robin is a head teacher of a boys' secondary school in Essex and has vast experience all throughout this pandemic, but on lots of other issues too. So we thank you for being here, Robin. It's very helpful to have you here to add your wisdom to our panel. Just to remind you, everybody, if you have questions or comments you want to make about how you're finding things, please do put them in the Q&A section, and then we will ask our panelists to respond to them. And just my apologies, the tech team tonight, we've got Dorothea James, who's handling the questions, and Tajinder Gill, who's looking after the chat, and Jacqueline Arnold and Faye Igbinoza are looking after the tech behind the scenes. So we're very grateful to them for that. I don't know if anybody else on our panel just at the moment wants to come in on any of those issues. We have got Jen Harvey here, who is a National Leadership Council member and is a head teacher of a school in West Sussex, so in the southeast region. Rupert Kay, who's the head teacher of a first school and nursery school in Frome in Somerset. He's a committed NEU leader and who passionately believes in social justice for all. I'm very pleased that Josie Whiteley, who's also a member of the National Leadership Council and vice chair, and is the rep for the Yorkshire and Humber region. And Josie has a background in further education, and she's an education consultant and currently a coach, and helps schools to achieve a mental health award run by Leeds Beckett and Minds Ahead. So if anybody wants to contact Josie about the work that she does, very, very useful for schools. You all know the mental health crisis that we're facing for many of our youngsters. And Robin, I've already introduced to you. So I hope I haven't missed anybody else out, and introduced Kevin right at the start. But we also have with us, and I don't see anybody indicating from our panelists that they want to add anything on COVID just at the moment, but perhaps we'll come back to that in maybe there's some Q&A questions that we can come to later. But also I'm very pleased to welcome Ros McNeil. Ros is an Assistant General Secretary at the NEU, and she works in that, and I'll probably get this the wrong way around, so you'll have to put me right, Ros, but the Research Campaigns and Policy, or the Policy Campaigns and Research unit of the NEU, and has long experience about a number of policy and campaign matters. And I think, Ros, you're going to speak to us particularly about the Recovery Hub. And I know leaders in schools are very aware of the need for helping our children recover from the pandemic. So I'll go straight to you, Ros, and then we'll come back to some further questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and I would certainly never put you straight on anything, but thank you for that very warm welcome. I'd like to say at the outset that I have a dodgy Zoom connection this afternoon, so if you do lose me, I'm very sorry about that, but please go on with the meeting, but I hope the Zoom connection holds up. Just want to talk to you, as Anne said, very briefly around recovery education, really in two parts. What a year. I mean, what an extraordinary year for school leaders, for the staff that you lead, your staff teams, and for the young people that you serve. We are obviously in constant dialogue with the government to say that next year will not be a normal year. It cannot be a standard year, that we have to conceive of and approach recovery education as a multi-year programme and an approach. We are very constant in our contention that the DfE must grant flexibility to school leaders so that you can do what you need to do to put children first and to be flexible in terms of curriculum. Now, it was useful, of course, that Sir Kevin Collins was saying useful things in public while he was the recovery czar until recently. He obviously put forward an evidence-led plan out into the public domain and to the DfE about the education funding that he'd identified would be needed for school leaders and for the system and the sector to respond to what's happened this year to young people and families. And obviously the NEU will absolutely keep pushing to outline and explain the additional funding required for schools and by schools if we're going to respond to the disruption. So we're absolutely committed to try and work to achieve with partners and to win popular public support to get more flexibility in the system across the next years. This isn't over by September. You know that more than I do. But we're also very committed to trying to put practical support in place so that we've got ideas and materials and very practical tips and tools that school groups can use. So if you haven't already, and you may well already have seen our recovery education hub. It started off in the spring as a remote education hub. It's now a recovery hub. And one of my colleagues will probably post the link to it in the chat during this call. What we've got from that is we're trying to put members in touch with each other. So if you've got particular questions around some of the real knotty issues, it's aimed to be a network where peers can share, because obviously this shouldn't be left to any individual school to have to find your way through it. We've got a real focus on mental health on the hub, about staff mental health, young people mental health. So we're trying to share the evidence broken down into a really practical, digestible bullet point form about, you know, the benefits of trying to use outdoor learning, trying to use play. And I do mean play and outdoor learning for secondary as well as obviously early years. So we've got content about using the pedagogy really about what would effective approaches consist of. And the aim is to have that to be things that you can discuss with your school group and that you might want particular members of staff to be aware. So I would like to recommend the hub to you and encourage you to use it. It's very, very digestible and readable because we absolutely appreciate how busy you are. My final point really is that the challenge that faces us all and that we are very much trying to get the DfE to own up to is that the pandemic has obviously revealed the inequality that already faced us as society and that you understand and see every day, and that we want the DfE to take seriously that we need to give schools what they need to be able to respond to that inequality after COVID, that trying to go back to normal in terms of the data, to very kind of high stakes approaches on accountability, to blaming schools and teachers is not the way forward, that we need the government to take responsibility for the areas on which they need to show leadership, on which they need to commit funding, on which they need to listen to the profession, because it's within the profession, it's within school leaders that we have the ideas. It's obviously been a terrifically challenging year, but it's also been such a creative year. You and your colleagues are and have been so resilient, and you have piloted, trialed, experimented, developed, created the development of online skills and the digital side of schools. What has been learnt this year at huge speed and under huge pressure has been extraordinary. So we also want the DfE to create some time and space for schools to step back and listen and evaluate. And I'm very conscious that as I say that to you, you will say, there is no time for that. We do not have that capacity in schools at the moment, but we have to continue to try and win and argue for that professional space. For pupils with special needs, we know that there's been lots of progress made about parents being able to explain more to schools about the challenges for those young people, and lots of schools have done things differently during COVID. So there's so much learning that we need to capture, but it's very difficult for schools to capture that learning if you're just under pressure to get back to normal and to get the data on track. So we need to openly have these discussions. So the Recovery Hub is there to connect people so that individual schools and leaders or teachers don't feel alone, that we can work together on a communal response to try and meet the needs of students. Some of the pieces are lighthearted and are about us as you know, staff together sharing the pressures so that it's possible to move forward and to be resilient in these difficult times. So I think I should leave it there, Anne, but please do use the hub. We will have lots of content at the end of August about getting ready for September and easy, practical, helpful things that we will share, obviously towards the end of the holidays, because we shouldn't be encouraging people working in the holidays. I know that you do, but we will share that at the end of the summer. So there'll be some very relevant content at the start of September, and we will keep sharing that with you via the Leadership Council and other routes. But please do have a look, and particularly get your colleagues involved in the network side of it, because if people have got questions and they just want to know what are you doing in your school around any particular areas, they can get answers and tips and ideas via that network, which is quite well used. Thanks very much, Anne.
Thank you, Ros. That's great to hear, and it's uplifting, isn't it, to hear about the ways that people are improving the lives of the youngsters that they have in front of them every day, and to have those ideas captured in the Recovery Hub is great. So I'm sure you'd welcome any more contributions that can be shared with other people on there. I'm going to, I could just promote as well. Please do go and have a look at the NEU website. There are a number of really good resources, things about inclusion in its widest sense, about tackling poverty. There is such really good material and very uplifting to look at it as well. So I would recommend that to you. Tajinder has put a number of links in the chat for you to have a look. The easy way for you to get and see exactly what's available to you. So another area that is causing a lot of stress for people, and you mentioned about data and so on, and that's the government's proposals about assessment, which you'll have heard about, but the NEU is trying to be very positive about an answer to all that work around assessment, and we've commissioned or funded a commission on assessment, and it's completely independent, and I'm going to ask Robin to talk about that because he's been much more involved in it, and I will have a lot to tell you about it. So over to you again, Robin, please.
Thank you very much, Anne. A topic that I think will resonate with everybody on the call, whatever phase of sector you're working in. And the key issue, the key question is, does our current model of assessment provision actually meet the needs of our pupils, both in terms of helping them demonstrate what they've learnt, no matter what their context, what their strengths? Does it meet the needs of pupils as in preparing them for further study? Does it meet their needs in terms of employment? And does it do it in a way that's valid and reliable? And finally, does it do it in a way that doesn't distort other aspects of school provision? And when we ask ourselves those questions, we realise very, very rapidly that the current model, particularly of secondary examinations, massively distorts the way that we provide for our pupils, doesn't meet the needs, just making some obvious statements here, doesn't meet the needs of a very significant range of pupils, and certainly doesn't in any way properly validate the skills and attributes that those young people demonstrate in things like teamwork, creativity, communication. What it actually does, by and large, is assesses their ability to recall and to some extent apply the learning that they have accomplished over the previous few years. Which isn't to say, and we all know from this year's experience, particularly in the secondary context, which isn't to say that there aren't some ways in which examinations can serve a very useful purpose. Okay, so this is not an entirely anti-examinations thing. So when we ask those questions, we know something's not right. Next thing to say is it really isn't like this in lots of other countries. And if you look at the assessment models that are used in, I'm just going to pick a few, in Norway, in Finland, in Australia, or in parts of Australia, in New Zealand, in parts of Canada, you discover that there are very different ways of assessing pupils particularly towards the end of the kind of school leaving period, with much broader kind of portfolios of evidence to support their attainment, to support their interests, to demonstrate skills and attributes. All of that is context. So what's the NEU done? The NEU has brought together, using a significant amount of funding, has brought together a whole series of groups of people who are really interested in this issue. Obviously, educators are, union members, of course, are. But actually, there's a lot of other people who it's really good to work with on challenging the current provision. So the NEU's brought together Parent Kind, a body that represents the interests of parents and the voices of parents. The CBI, who you all know, represents the interests of employers. The Chartered College of Teaching, which gives a different kind of voice from the profession. National Union of Students, because at the end of the day, all of this is about the experiences that pupils and students have. Groups like the Edge Foundation, which has been campaigning for more authentic and appropriate forms of assessment and curriculum in schools. and also experts. So we've got Professor Vinnie Lander from Leeds Beckett, who specialises in aspects of curriculum and assessment in relation to the experience of those from minorities within our own country, but what she rightly refers to as global majority pupils. From an expertise from Professor Louise Hayward, who is chairing the commission, who is an international assessment expert based at the University of Glasgow. NEU's brought all these people together to hear their voices, to understand their experiences, and is seeking to draw together conclusions around what a system of equitable and reliable assessment would actually look like. We know it's a domain where there will be tensions. If you do more of this, then you may need to do less of that. You may not necessarily be able to get everything right, but we know that the current model, particularly in secondary schools, which is exclusively designed downwards from the needs of those most able pupils, arguably the most advantaged pupils. You think about GCSE. GCSE is designed downwards from the performativity levels of the highest attaining students in order to meet their needs to go on to A-level and university, but with no regard for the fact that it means that 60–70% of pupils have got a qualification that is not designed for their benefit. So that's what the Assessment Commission is up to, bringing together those voices. We'll be publishing an authoritative report this summer. There is a website. Somebody might be able to post the link to it. It's now. Now, somebody better post it, because I know that the commission has called itself ERA, Equitable Reliable Assessment, New Era, but I can't remember the exact link. But we'll get that in there.
It's there, Robin. It's in the chat.
Thank you. Mine's not scrolling up. Bless you. Thank you, Anne. Fabulous. So everybody on the call can have a little look at the resources that are there. Please also, when you see on social media that there are some short videos about this, there's some fabulous videos featuring students talking about, pupils talking about their experience of assessment. When you see that, please do magnify that voice, spread the message, because fundamentally this commission, independent of the NEU but funded by the NEU, bringing together all those different voices, is intended to move the public conversation from one of accepting exams in their current form as inevitable and unavoidable into actually recognizing that there are different ways and there are better ways, and we can make a move towards those things. I'll stop there, Anne. Hope that's enough.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm going to go to our panellists in a moment for a comment, but just to give them a moment to gather their thoughts, point out that that would be a great topic for a local network meeting of leaders. And just to say that John Hayes has published in the chat that there's going to be a London leaders meeting by Zoom on the 13th of July. And I'm sure John won't mind if other people from other areas of the country drop into that and listen, and then perhaps contact the reps in your own area to put on something similar in your own network around the subject of assessment and what it means for schools and how it's driving a narrowing of curriculum, and as Robin has said, doesn't meet the needs of our pupils either at secondary level. And I know the commission is about secondary assessment, but also when we think about primary assessment, that also doesn't meet the needs of our pupils. So that's one topic. It could be that you want to look again at recovery, as Ros has outlined to you tonight, and you can go and have a look at those materials and then get together with leaders in your area to discuss them and think about the things that you've been doing in your own settings that are aiding your children and helping them to have good mental health and to have a curriculum which meets their needs. I'm going to ask then perhaps Josie, if you would like to come in first, if you've got any observations or comments or something you might like to add from your perspective, if that's all right.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I was just thinking about there listening to Robin was the way how our exam system ensures a percentage fail. And to me, that is just morally wrong. And I think we need to get to grips with that and get to the bottom of that, because what that does is it instills in some young people a lack of confidence and a feeling of worthlessness that means the next 40 years of their life and their careers affected. None of us feel good if we fail an exam. So the idea that the government are not focusing on the right thing. It should be about developing skills and competencies that are going to keep children and young people out for life. I mean, my background is post-16, and the number of young people I've had to deal with at the age of 16 over 2 decades who feel demoralised, who've had a dreadful experience at school, and actually what's caused that is their lack of achievement and the impact that's had on their self-worth. Things like behaviours of young people, how they treat each other, taking a greener approach to living and understanding all that bigger picture that we're facing on the planet, I think is really key. It's not just about what level you've got in your maths. I mean, this might upset Robin because I know maths is his specialism, but I still have nightmares about my O-level maths in 1981. Quadratic equations, I struggled to get my head around them, and I've gone on to lead a multi-million-pound department in a number of colleges, and I've never ever needed quadratic equations. What was the point and purpose of me having to learn about them? Yes, I need to understand percentages and things like that, and it's that kind of thing. So it's really reassuring that we've got this body now looking at what we need for the future for our students so they can all succeed in whatever they're really good at. And of course, I'm very interested in and concerned about mental health issues, and it makes it even more important now after 15, 16 months of this pandemic that we support our young people in being able to achieve and do well when they've missed so much, and so many thousands of them are struggling with mental health issues. So that's my contribution, Anne.
Thank you very much, Josie. I think you were going to open up a debate there about what's worthwhile knowledge and what's not. So, and that's probably too much for us to get into this evening, but thank you very much for that contribution. Can I just urge people who are on the call, if you've got a question or a comment, please do put it in the Q&A box. We haven't got anything for our panelists at the moment, but I'm sure what you've heard tonight may have set off some thoughts, even if not direct questions. So please add those as well. They'll be interesting for us to read. So I'm going to go to Rupert now and hear his observations or some short comments you'd like to make, Rupert, about what we've been talking about this evening, and then I'll come to you, Jen.
Thank you very much, Anne, and colleagues. It's wonderful to share with you. One of my reflections is that at this time when we've been socially distanced and have felt so isolated, and we recognise that that's taken a huge toll upon the well-being of staff and colleagues, as well as the young people and children that we work with. Opportunities for us to meet like this have drawn people closer. And I would say that within my own school community, where we've had bubbles and many staff rooms, and even at a point where in this last academic year, tragically, a member of staff died in our school community 2 days before we broke for the Christmas holiday last year. And as you can imagine, at that point of bereavement, it fell to me to remind people to maintain social distancing, and that only people within her bubble were allowed to that they could only comfort each other physically within their own bubbles. That was perhaps the hardest thing I've had to do, beside breaking the news class by class to the children and explaining to them, and we're a nursery and first school, 2 to 9-year-olds, in an age-appropriate way, the tragedy that had befallen us. But the point that I'm getting to is that we might be socially distant, but I think we've become emotionally closer. And I think what we've seen is the importance of relationships. I think we've seen the importance of emotional intelligence as a key skill for leaders. And I think the National Education Union has time and time again shown itself to be an organisation of integrity, led by people of integrity, representing people of integrity, and what contrast that represents to politicians of many different parties. You know, when we've wanted an opposition that would step up and speak out, we haven't always heard that voice. When we've wanted cabinet members to be in tune with the people that they represent, and to reflect the body of knowledge that is put before them in COBRA meetings, etc., and SAGE. And what we've had is we've had to put up with lies and misrepresentation, and the nation has been sold short. But I'm particularly proud, locally, regionally, and nationally, that the NEU has time and time again stepped up with other trade union colleagues and has spoken truth, not just to power, but to the powerless. And I think we've brought a great deal of hope to communities where politicians have missed an opportunity just to step up and be decent human beings in this time of pandemic. And now we transit into a time of endemic, don't we? We're going to have to live with this as a chronic social condition. And we don't know the ongoing cost of this. You know, we've already mentioned long COVID. That's not yet medically a recognized condition. It's a collection of syndromes. But I think going forward, you know, it'll be a huge workload for NEU reps, as many of our members have to struggle forwards with long COVID. But you know, I'm not going to repeat the many good points that have already been mentioned by colleagues here, but I just want to emphasize once more the importance of, you know, compassion, relationships, emotional intelligence. That's what we do well. And I think the young people have hopefully seen in us as adults good role models for the choices that they can make in the future.
Thank you very much, Rupert. Very powerful words, and I think you're absolutely right. Schools and educational settings have been solace for many, many people over this period, as they've had to come to terms with very, very difficult situations. And you know, that's one thing about being the member of the union. We can lean on each other, because who fills up the leader's well of emotional resilience, and we're here to do that for each other. And so thank you very much for that. Jen, I'm going to come to you just to hear your reflections, please. And don't forget, everybody, if you want to recount something that you found perhaps uplifting through this period, something positive, then please put it in the Q&A or put it in the chat and share it with others. Jen.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you, Rupert. It was interesting listening to what you were saying about staff supporting each other, because I would echo that in our primary school. I've never seen such tired staff. They are really utterly exhausted, but they've been really supportive to each other, and they've had the energy to give everything to the children as well. So I'm full of admiration for all the staff who've worked so hard. I want to just pick up on assessment from a primary point of view, because we absolutely supported the decision to cancel the SATs this year. It was the right thing to do, and there was no alternative. And it won't surprise any of you to know that we've all managed really, really well without them. And, you know, we have got an increased amount of teaching time where we would have normally been teaching the children how to sit the SATs and how to do it, and teaching them how to do a test. We've been able to engage them in the curriculum, and we think it's had a really positive effect on their well-being and their engagement in what's going on. And we've spent more time preparing them for secondary school because we've had all that pressure taken away. The children, of course, were absolutely delighted when they realised that they wouldn't be there. They have come back a little bit by stealth, because we've got where the Year 1 phonics test was cancelled, it's now been pushed into the autumn term, so the Year 2s will still have that phonics screening. And I am really concerned about the plans to push ahead with the Year 4 table screening next year. I believe that particular test is going to really disadvantage those children with learning difficulties or processing difficulties, where they've got a real limit on the time that they can respond to these tests. So I am really interested, and I know you mentioned, Robin, that there was some focus on primary assessment within the study that was being undertaken. I wondered if you could just give me a bit of a reassurance to take back to staff that that is going to be part of it.
Thanks very much, Jen. And yes, Robin, if you want to come in and respond to Jen's question, that'd be great.
So the Independent Assessment Commission itself is looking at post 16 plus assessment only. So that covers obviously your GCSEs, vocational alternatives, A levels, vocational alternatives, international baccalaureate and so on. But the union has got a lot of work going on with more than a score, campaigning around the SATs, campaigning around the baseline assessment. And those are actually much less contested areas, Jen. The only people who seem to think they're a good idea are the people in Whitehall, or at least one group of the people in Whitehall, and the people who are in the Ofsted headquarters. It really is that it's a really strange battle, because when you look at particularly the early years arena, the difference between what authoritative, experienced practitioners tell us about what is effective in early years practice, what good early years practice looks like, both in the UK, but also drawing on huge international base of evidence. The difference between that and what's expected in some of the new baseline profiling, and you can tell by my language I'm less familiar with the way. So the union's position on that has simply remained absolutely solid, and using particularly the organisation more than the score as a way of pushing that forward. Really powerful. I'm going to pass the baton here to Ros in case there's anything that I've missed, or Kevin I think is just unmuted. So.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if Ros or Kevin wanted to come back in on anything that you've heard so far. So Ros, if I come to you first and then Kevin.
Thank you, Anne. I mean, I would have said there what Robin has said, which is that we absolutely are committed to gathering evidence and bringing together all of the academic research that shows that there is no sensible basis for this standardised approach to testing and formal assessment for these age groups, and that I think we are getting somewhere in terms of public support, popular support and parental support for that position. But Robin does outline the challenge there of us needing to make breakthroughs at government level for those positions. So those campaigns absolutely continue. And we do need to engage wider groups of members in those to create more pressure and momentum. But I think that we can do that because, of course, we need to that's the wrong word. COVID, I think, has opened up these discussions. COVID has created a level of consciousness and understanding about mental well-being, and giving young people a sense of belonging in their school like never before. And there are a wider range of MPs. There are Conservative MPs who are raising and who are interested in mental well-being and mental health, and Kevin Collins and others, and Becky Francis, who leads the EEF that looks at the evidence base for what are helpful interventions. All of those high-profile figures, and of course the NEU, are very clear that in terms of well-being and learning, that is a reciprocal relationship. There is no learning without well-being. I mean, that's a blunt way to say it, but that debate helps for us to make the arguments that we had been making before COVID, but we need to marshal those arguments very well to use the academic evidence and to use the concern that parents are showing about the well-being. And there are different arguments about the well-being of 4-year-olds. And of course, if we look at teenagers, there's considerable concern about the pressures on young people in their lives. Some of those pressures come from outside school, but unfortunately, there is evidence that some of those pressures come from within school because of the exam factory culture that national policy has created, that school leaders and secondary teachers want to speak out against, but it's an unintended consequence of national policy that we have to highlight. So for different age groups, the pressure is different, but we have to show the harm and of course then describe the positive alternative to colleagues in the union, and then outwardly describe that we have got a positive alternative. There is evidence. There are, as Robin said, very good, clear examples from other countries and other jurisdictions, because then I think that builds a very compelling case for change.
Thank you very much, Ros. And it kind of brings us back to the words that Josie was saying. If we've got a system that test children to the point that they feel that they're no good, that that they haven't got the talents and skills, then it makes them feel excluded, even though we know how important belonging and being included is for people's health and well-being. Kevin, would you like to add anything more?
Yeah, I'll keep it really brief because Robin and Ros have just done a very good job. I think it's important to know that we are the force, the funder behind More Than a Score. There is always a difficulty when you work in that way, that members don't always see that it's the union doing it, but we are really promoting the work by that. We want to use the example of this year. We're going to do a survey of primary members in the next couple of days, hoping for a very strong response that we can get publicity for around not having the SATs next year. But the thing I wanted to add in specifically is, I think that Robin and Ros are right, that there is, when Robin says that the number of people in favour of this is very small, it's Nick Gibb and a few people around Nick Gibb. And even in Nick Gibb's party, there are voices that are speaking out. And Mary and I met a couple of weeks ago with representatives of the One Nation group of Tory MPs. And we are doing a fringe meeting with them at the Conservative conference about assessment, the primary assessment, and about the fact that we don't need the SATs. So we are trying to find ways into that. When we talk, I think that the secondary commission, which isn't looking at this, but it gives us connections with the CBI, with the Edge Foundation, with Parentkind, and they share the ideas that we've got there, and they share the ideas. So it's another way of building up that force for our argument and the allies that will support us in trying to defeat Nick Gibb in the Conservative Party over these questions.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We don't have any questions or comments, and we've got a few minutes left, so I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else you want to say that hasn't been said this evening.
Can I just echo back on something that Rupert said? I thought, and Rupert, thank you. It's fabulous sharing panels with other school leaders and hearing those authentic voices. And the way that you conveyed the centrality of humanity and relationship, empathy and compassion was really genuinely powerful. It kind of jolted me just a little bit, not because I don't agree with what you said, but actually because it reminded me of how easy it is as school and college leaders, particularly if we're also involved in some campaigning, that we can easily find our thinking and our actions dominated by the issues that we're working on that particular day. So we've heard about some of them, assessment, we've heard about the COVID challenges, and there are issues affecting a lot of us around the pressure to become MATs and these kind of things. And what you said, Rupert, reminds us that in our role as leaders and in our role as trade unionists, that bringing ourselves back to our fundamental values, reminding ourselves why we do what we do. And that takes me back to where I get my energy from kind of almost every day, which is not sitting in my office. It's getting up, going outside, it's being with the pupils who I teach, whether that's in assemblies, whether it's break time, lunch times, whether it's teaching lessons, or it's coaching a member of staff to help them be better in their job, or helping somebody on their way. It's those transformative aspects, and you're absolutely right, built on relationship, that are what motivate and guide us. And we get taken away from that, I think, too often. So Rupert, this is really just a kind of on-screen, thank you very much for that contribution.
Yes, and thank you, Robin. And I think the sorts of things you're talking about take us back to our ethical code of leadership as well, which I'd recommend to everybody to have a look at. You might be interested to know as well that we network together using the Guild social media platform. And if you'd like to be a member of Guild so that you can follow conversations with other leaders, get links to very valuable and useful resources, hear different points of view, and get mutual support, and that thing of being with solace with other people. Then, you know, please do let our national officer, Steve Cooper, who is on the call tonight, and I haven't mentioned yet, but Steve is our National Officer for Leadership Members, and he has a wealth of experience and can point you in the right direction for any of the things that you might need to know about, or if you want to find something, he's the person to go to. So thank you very much, Steve. And I'd like to round up by giving my thanks to all of you for being on the call tonight. I know this is it's been an exhausting year, an absolutely flat out exhausting year. Come September, it'll be the 3rd academic year of being under the influence of the pandemic, and as Rupert said, moving into the endemic stage, but nonetheless likely to be a 3rd academic year of disruption. So thank you for all that you do to keep our education service going, and for the way that you look after the pupils and the staff in your care. I'd like to pay tribute to Robin. It's been a presidential year for him like no other. I was very fortunate to be a president of the NUT, and I had a high old time visiting other countries around the world, a year out of school, and visiting actual in real life people. I've learnt a new acronym actually. If you put IRL, it means that you're meeting somebody in real life, and how we all long to do that. And throughout this, Robin, you've been an absolutely exceptional president, and have kept working in your school as well throughout, and chaired goodness knows how many Zoom meetings and the national conference, and done with all such graciousness, aplomb and good humour. And we thoroughly appreciate your contribution to the life of the NEU in holding us all together and holding us up as well at this time, and propping us up. So thank you very much. And to my fellow National Council members, thank you for being on here and for the work that we've done over the last 2 years. It's been tremendous. And of course, our staff at headquarters and out in the regions, who work so hard to keep the union going in difficult circumstances themselves, and all ably led by Kevin and Mary. And hats off to you for all you've done during this time. So it's only a few more weeks to go, 2 or 3 weeks to the summer. So please take your opportunity to get some rest and recuperation. It's been incredibly hard, and then we'll be ready to go again come September. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and good night, everyone.